right, well, happy Easter. I love Easter because some of you are going, it's my first time here. Okay, most of you, it's your first time here. Okay, don't feel like you're alone if you're like, I've never been, don't worry. If you haven't been here in a year, that's okay too. We're used to that as well. So, welcome. I'm Steve. I'm the lead pastor. The primary designation, or one of the primary designations to that means I'm the one that does most of the talking. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to talk for a while. And surprisingly, I'm not going to start on Easter. We're going to get to Easter, but I want to start somewhere else because we're starting a brand new series today. And the series is called Future Focus. Now, I don't know, but have you ever had one of those years when life's smooth? When there are like no major changes, the entire month, entire year is just calm, and you don't have to make any major decisions. There's no major life changes. Everything just goes, and you don't have to make any big. Anybody have years like that? Yeah, me neither. I've never had a year like that. And this year is okay. I have a wife. I have 3 daughters. 2 of them are married. We have 3 grandchildren. And currently, and it's a cool situation, 2 of my daughters, they share our old house. They live in that house with the 3 grandkids and a handful of dogs. I've lost count how many dogs they currently have. And then my wife and I live with our youngest daughter in a house that we actually rent. And one of the cool things that's going to happen this year is that we're all moving. All of us. Dominique, the baby, is going to college in Pennsylvania because she can't stand us closer than that. That was like the minimum distance she needed to get for her sanity. The rest of us are moving in the area, but we're going to end up trying to sell one house, moving out of the other house, and finding 4 new places to live this year. And in the meantime, we've got to take the house that we raised our daughters in, along with all those dogs, and try to turn it into a place someone would actually want to purchase. So it's shaping up to be a very interesting year. I mean, there's going to be a surgery. It's going to be a year with lots and lots of events, lots and lots of happenings, lots and lots of decisions. And frankly, isn't that how most of our lives run? Is lots of decisions, lots of things are happening, lots of things have to happen throughout the course of the year. In this whole series, we're going to be talking about how to handle those things, how to make sure you're aimed in the right direction, how to make the good decisions, and everything else. And so today, we're going to start this series. Don't worry, we will get to Easter. But we're going to start the series with just the concept of how to make good decisions. Because do you know anybody, is there anybody in your life that you kind of wish it was okay to slap? Right? I mean, there are people who I don't know about you, there are people that I am convinced deep down in my heart that that's really all they need. That all they really need is a really good, probably just one slap, just forward. You don't even have to come back. That one good slap would fix a lot of their stuff. Because they just keep making really, really bad decisions. And so let's talk just a little bit about what goes into a good decision. What makes it so that we make good decisions? Well, first off, we got to recognize how important they are because our lives are defined by the choices we make. Our lives are defined by the choices we make. Let me give you a few quotes on that. You have to write fast because I'm going to the next thing. John Maxwell says, life's a matter of choices, and every choice you make makes you. Life's a matter of choices, and every choice you make makes you. Eleanor Roosevelt had a really great quote on that. She says, I am who I am today because of the choices I made yesterday. And if you look back on your life, that's a true statement for every one of us. And then, of course, one more quote from a wise man. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. And that was Dumbledore. Harry Potter, for the 7 of you didn't get that. We are defined by the choices that we make. And one of the problems that we have to confront in our lives is we have a tendency in our culture to deny that reality, to deny that we're defined by the choices that we make. And the next thing you have to own your choices. Good decisions start by owning our choices. Pastor Barry has a really good joke, but do you have private jokes? You have public jokes. If you're a pastor, you have private jokes and public jokes. There are the jokes that I can tell everybody, and there are a few jokes that I've got one friend in Pennsylvania that I email them to. You'll never see those, don't worry. Okay. But I don't know whether this was one of Pastor Barry's private jokes or one that he thought about making public, but he's never told it in public, but I'm going to bring it out today for you. And I think I got his permission, so we're good, I'm sure. Somebody who works for you, it's easier to get their permission for stuff like that. So his thing is, he did it for me once. We were driving, you've been driving down the road, and you see along the side of the road, there's a bunch of people in orange jumpsuits. Not orange vests, jumpsuits, okay? The full jumpsuit thing going on. And there's the white school bus, right? And there's a couple, 3 guys with shotguns, right? And what Barry wants, I don't know if he's ever done it yet, but I may help him do this one. He wants to, as he's driving by these, he wants to slow down, roll down his window and go, "You made bad decisions." Now, here's the sad thing about the joke. If he were to do that, and then you were to stop and the guys with the shotguns would let you, if you went and talked to all the men and women in the jumpsuits and asked them about that concept, would most of them agree with that they'd made bad decisions? Or how many of them would start going like this? "Oh, I had a bad lawyer. There was a bad ID. I really didn't do it. I had a rough childhood. Da-da-da-da-da. Here's all the reasons that I'm not owning my choices." And all of us tend to do that. All of us have this tendency, the things that are big in our lives, to start blaming something else. I would do better at my job, but my boss has it against me. My marriage would work. Marriage would work if I could find the right person, and this person that says that is on number 5. Anytime I talk to somebody who's on like number 4 or 5 and they're wanting to tell me how bad the others were, I'm going, there's only one common ingredient in every one of your marriages. You. Okay? And so we have to start owning those, but we also have a tendency to deny it. We also have in our culture a tendency toward what I would call determinism, very positive determinism. That means that it's all going to work out. Everything just works out. If you ever hear an athlete get interviewed about anything, they'll go, "Well, we knew it was all going to work out. It's all part of the plan." You ever hear that one? And it's always based on absolutely nothing. Why are things going to work out? Well, because I believe things are going to work out. Oh, you believe things are going to work out. So they're going to work out. Yeah. Everything, there's just part of the plan. It's just part of the plan. Who's playing? Well, I don't know, but it's part of the plan. It's part of the plan. And there's a real problem with either when you blame other people or when you just say, "Oh, it's just part of the plan. It's just how things are going to work out. Everything's going to work out just fine." And the problem while there's a positive, it makes you feel less bad about your bad decisions. The negative is you can't change it if you don't own it. If you're always pointing at somebody else, you can't fix you. If you're always saying that's just the problem or you don't own your decisions, okay? Stephen Covey says, "Until a person can say deeply and honestly, 'I am what I am today because of the choices I made yesterday,' that person cannot say, 'I choose otherwise.'" Can I just lay this down there for you? Some of you here today are stuck. And the only thing that can fix your stuck is for you to start making better choices. And you can look for everything in the world to fix that. You can try everything in the world. You can blame everybody in the world. You can say it's all going to work out. But until you start owning your responsibilities, owning your choices, owning your decisions, your life is going to continue on the same path it is. And if you don't like that path, you have to choose to get off of it. That make sense? And today, we're going to look at 2 people who had a choice to make. Made very, very different choices. But they're going to teach us one super valuable lesson. And that super valuable lesson is that the foundation for good decisions is honesty. The foundation for good decisions is honesty. And the 2 guys we're going to look at, we're going to now get to the whole Easter thing. And let me read you something out of the Gospel of Luke about Jesus. It's going to be the crucifixion and all that. You guys know that story, right? The crucifixion story. As they led Jesus away, a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene, happened to be coming in from the countryside. The soldiers seized him and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. So Jesus is carrying the crossbar for his own cross to his own crucifixion, and they get another guy to carry it because Jesus is too weak because of how much beating he's taken. And then a little bit later it says, 2 others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. When they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross, and the criminals were also crucified, one on his right, one on his left. Now, the thing that I kind of noticed about this is it would be hard to imagine 2 people who have more in common than the 2 people on the size of Jesus. What are they getting in trouble for? Well, we learn in the other books that they were both caught for thieves. They were thieves. They'd obviously done more than just stealing. There must have been murder involved. So they were thieves and murderers, and they were being crucified at the exact same time as Jesus. They also, I think, were probably in cohorts together. I think they were working together because they seem to be aware of each other. They're getting crucified the same day. Another thing that we don't see here is that there was the Romans who were doing the crucifixion. They were in control in Jerusalem when Jesus was around. They liked to make power statements. They liked to let everybody know they were in control. And Passover, which is when this is happening, is the biggest festival of the year. So Jerusalem would go from a few 100,000 people to over 1 million people for this 1 week. And so the Romans were I believe, very specifically going to have a celebratory crucifixion to remind everybody who was in charge. And they had this really bad dude named Barabbas. And Barabbas had started an insurrection, and they wanted to make an example of Barabbas, so they were going to crucify him during Passover. And I believe they brought along 2 of his partners. But because God was in control and things were going in a different direction, Barabbas gets subbed out for Jesus. But I think the 2 guys beside him, from the way they interact, I think they knew each other, and I wouldn't be surprised to find out that they were both in the same gang, and a caper went bad. So they're just as identical as you can be, down to the fact they have about the same number of breaths left on earth. And so we got these 2 guys, and now let's keep reading about what happens as these guys try to make a decision. Okay, Jesus is up on the cross, and he says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." Very important what he says. And the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. The crowd watched and the leaders scoffed. He saved others. They said, "Let him save himself if he's really God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers mocked him too, offering him a drink of sour wine. They called out to him, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." A sign was fastened above him with these words, "This is the king of the Jews." See a theme? One of the criminals hanging beside him says, "Looks like the people around me are having fun. I want to join." One of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed, "So you're the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself and us too while you're at it." But the other criminal protested, "Don't you fear God even when you have been sentenced to die? We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man didn't do anything wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise." 2 guys, identical. One chooses as one of his last decisions to mock Jesus. The other chooses to embrace and accept Jesus. What's the difference? What led to one making what we would say is a very good decision and one making a very, very bad choice? Okay? Well, I think the foundation for good decisions is honesty. And the first thing we've got to be honest about is who we are. We've got to look at ourselves honestly. See, what's the first dude really doing? We don't know their names. I'm just calling him first dude. The one who attacks Jesus, what's he doing? I think there's a word called deflecting. See, his other option is to look at himself, to say, "Who am I?" Said he's going to yell at Jesus, which is what the crowd does, which is what we do, right? We talked about our orange jumpsuit people and how they're pointing at the lawyer, pointing at the judge, pointing at the other people, but we do the same thing. We like to point at other people. We don't like to look at ourselves. We don't like to be honest about ourselves. It's a big challenge for all of us, being honest about who we really are. But the second dude, remember what the second dude did? He said, "We deserve to die for our crimes." He looked at himself honestly. Said, this is who I really am. I am the guy on the cross because I made the choices that made me the guy on the cross. So my question might be, who am I? If I'm going to define Steve, how do I define Steve? And if I'm really honest about it and I really look deep, I don't always like that answer. I may want to deflect it. I may want to blame somebody else because I'm screwed up. I mean, I'll say that. I think probably true for you if you're honest with yourself, but I'm screwed up. I've got an amazing, wonderful, fantastic, loving wife. I realized this week that if I want us to save money, I have to shop for me and not let her do it. Because if I'm buying for me, I'll buy the cheapest thing there is. If she's buying for me, she'll buy a nicer version. I'm like, so I got to do all the shopping for me now because I want to save money. But, you know, that wonderful person, I will speak harshly to her. I'm not abusively, but I'll speak strongly. I'll say negative words to her. I'll say things that aren't. I'll choose not to. She loves to spend time with me, and I frequently love not to reciprocate that. I got 3 amazing daughters, and I will choose to speak things to them that are not building them up. They're degrading to them. Even when they're not around, I will choose frequently to be selfish. And here's the problem. Not only have I spoke wrong to my wife, not only have I spoke wrong to my daughters, not only have I chosen to be selfish, I don't like this, but the reality is I am willing to be, I'm certain in the next week I will do 1, 2, or 3 of those again. Because I'm screwed up. I do things that are wrong. I do them on purpose, and I keep going back and doing them again. So if I'm going to be honest about who I am, one of the things I have to be honest about is that I'm a screwed up, selfish person. That's not comfortable. That's not fun. Do you think it was fun for this guy to say we deserve to die for our sins? No, but it's honest. And it's an honesty that we have to have. If we're going to make good decisions, we have to own up to who we are. We also have to be honest about where we are. Honest about where we are. And that's my circumstances. Okay, let's talk about this. It's true for both the dudes. But we'll talk about the first one, the one who is harassing Jesus. Most of us don't know how long we have to live. Most of us are very optimistic. It's a long time yet, right? We're all, I got a lot of time. It's true for some of us, not true for some of us, but we all have this feeling it's a long time. If I said, when do you think you're going to die? Because we're all going to die. What would you say? Way in the future sometime. This dude knew the answer to the question. When are you going to die? Well, I'm hanging on a cross. Nobody gets over that. There's no recovery from that. 24 hours, my body will be thrown in a dump. Matter of fact, if he were kind of the really analytical type, he could literally roughly approximate how many breaths he had left. Because he's hanging on a cross, and you don't breathe very well on a cross because you're hanging from the nails in your hands against the nails in your feet, and so choosing to push off is very painful. Breathing is very, very hard. It would be easy for him to count how many breaths he was making in a minute, be easy to compute how many, of course there's 60 minutes in an hour, and he could probably say, they're probably going to take us down and end us at sunset. So how long till sunset? And do the math, and that's how many breaths he had left. But instead of dealing with that reality of where he was, he denied it and went on like nothing was going wrong. And the weird thing was, he wasn't even honest about the person next to him. He wasn't honest about where he was himself or that person. Because here's the thing, he's yelling at Jesus, and nobody there thought Jesus deserved to be on a cross. The ruler who had sent Jesus to the cross said, he really doesn't deserve to be there. As you go through the story, one after another, the person would go, yeah, he doesn't deserve to be here. Yeah, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. Throughout the crowd, it just kept happening. And a person going, yeah, he shouldn't be there. And then throughout history, there is nobody who thinks Jesus deserved to die. Nobody, nobody, nobody. I'm not talking just Christians. Christians at least have a theory on the fact that Jesus was dying for us to take away our screwed upness. But even the most hostile person who's opposed to God and Christianity, all of them say, yeah, well, Jesus was a good teacher. He was a good... No, he didn't do anything you should kill him for. So this guy's got everything wrong. And what's the other guy say? He says, don't you fear God? Talking to the other guy. Even when you've been sentenced to die. This is where we are. This is our reality. And we have a strong tendency to deny our reality. I get confronted with this frequently because I do a fair amount of marriage counseling, and I don't do marriage counseling unless it's in crisis mode. If you just need a tweak, I'm not your guy. But if you have a restraining order against each other, I'm here. I've done that. I've met people have so, and I'll be talking to this couple, and they are, just like the one guy could count his breaths, they could count the days they have left being married. And next thing I know, they're arguing about the fact that one of them hangs the toilet paper roll wrong. I looked it up on the patent, and it's supposed to be like this. I'm going, seriously? Seriously, you are this close to divorce, and you want me to help you solve your toilet paper problem. But we do that. We have a real actual problem going on in our lives, and what do we want to do? We want to talk about everything but that. We don't want to be honest about where we are any more than we want to be honest about who we are. Which leads us to the biggest part of being honest. Let's say you're going into your neighborhood, and as you're coming in, you see a house was on fire in your neighborhood. There's flames coming out of the top of the house. It's not engulfed, but you can actually see flames. And so you park, and you run to the house, and there's a guy coming out of the house, and he's carrying a big screen TV. And you see him run over, and he's got a pile, and in the pile there's like a four-wheeler, and there's a couple gaming systems, and now he puts the TV there, and you grab him by the arm because he looks like he's going back in again. You go, you can't go back in. Look, it's almost your house is. There's no time. He goes, but I got to get my family. Yeah, that would be bad priorities, right? That would be saying, oh, this is the most important thing. But you got to be honest about what's important. You got to be honest about what really matters. And to be honest with you, most of us are not honest about what really matters. Most of us have two sets of priorities. You know how like a shady person will have two sets of books? They'll have the books they show to the authorities, and they'll have the books that show where the money really goes. Most of us have two sets of priorities. We've got what we say are our priorities. We got what we say is where our money and our time should go. But if you were to check the actual books, if you were to check like our actual bank statement, if you were actually to check our calendar, and you were to stand there in court, and they were to say, okay, you're saying your priority is this. Can you explain this bank statement? No. Can't. Can you explain? This is we've got your Google timeline that tells where you were every minute of every day for the past year, and here's where you were. Does that match up with your priorities? It does not appear to, no. Because most of us have our real priorities and the priorities we want to tell everybody that we have. Okay? And here's a question. Do your decisions match your priorities? When you're running back in the house, what are you grabbing? Okay? And do your priorities align with reality? Are they real? So, we've got one dude, and he's hanging on the cross, and he is choosing to harass Jesus. Now, I want you to think about one major piece of this whole cross puzzle. And that is, speaking is hard from a cross. To say anything is very, very difficult because you have to push against the nails in your feet. You have to pull on the nails in your wrists. You have to pull yourself up enough to speak because it's hard to speak hanging. You just can't speak just hanging. You have to pull yourself up to make a statement. So it's very, very hard to speak. So people didn't talk a lot from there. They weren't chatty on the cross. Matter of fact, Jesus said a total of 7 things. He was on the cross for hours. He said 7 things. Made 7 statements, period. This dude is pulling himself up against the nails so he can yell at Jesus. You think there might have been something better he could have been doing? I mean, do you think maybe, speculating, maybe one of his nephews showed up? Because family would show up for these things as the last time they saw their loved one. Do you think maybe pulling yourself up and going, hey, nephew, setting a bad example, don't do this, would have been okay? Jesus' mother was there. It's possible his mother was there. Do you think maybe he could have pulled up and said, Mom, I'm sorry, this is not your fault. Don't blame yourself. I love you. Do you think he could have said that? Yeah. But he didn't. He had X breaths left. He chose to spend them harassing Jesus. That blows my mind. Now, how do I know if I have the right priorities? Or how do I know if I'm living my priorities? Even better question. How do I know that I'm living my real priorities? Well, we're about to see something here. Because there are people who have priorities that are different than yours. Right? This shows up a lot when you get out of college or get out of school, or just when you step into real life, exactly when it happens. Because there's pre-real life. And pre-real life, what are your limitations? There aren't many. Okay, if I want to go do something on Friday night and it's going to take all night, what do? I go out and spend Friday night doing whatever I want to do, and it doesn't matter because I have no hindrances, no anything else. Real life hasn't snuck up on me yet. But if you'll notice, as you go into the 18, 20, 25, somewhere in there for most of us, we actually realize, oh my gosh, I am now a grown-up. And there will come a point when somebody calls and says, hey, dude, hey, we're going to the beach tomorrow. You want to go to the beach? And you hear yourself saying, I can't. I got to work. It's Tuesday. Right? And you have that transition where you go from anything goes to I can't go. I have to live my priorities. I gotta live my life. And what happens, what does the other person say? The first time you do the grown-up statement to one of your not quite grown-up friends. What happened to you, man? You used to be fun. What happened to you? What happened is I got a different set of priorities. Your priorities currently are, how much fun can I squeeze into a weekend? And my priorities are, I don't know, paying bills, making sure my wife still loves me, taking care of the kids. My priorities have shifted. And the way you can tell if you're living your priorities is if people have different priorities, question your sanity. Okay? If your friend is going, dude, or you're looking at your friend going, dude, it's really, you're 37. It's really time to move to the next step. Saying. So if people who don't share your priorities think you're saying and doing things that don't make sense, that means you're living your priorities. That's a general test. And we can tell that if we go to the next little section that happens in our story and we look at what both the thief and Jesus say. Because if you don't share Jesus' priorities, what the thief and Jesus say make absolutely no sense whatsoever. Because the thief over here is yelling at Jesus. This one turns and says, dude, don't you fear God? Well, this is where you can see his priorities have shifted pretty drastically. If he'd asked himself, don't you fear God, a few months ago, he wouldn't be on a cross right now. Right? So he says, don't you fear God? My priorities have changed. And then he says something that when you stop and think about it is, I'm trying to think of a word other than stupid. Nothing's really come. So let's just say what he says next is just stupid. Because he says to Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Now, who's he saying it to? from regular priorities. Who's he saying it to? A dude who is being executed. All three of these guys have a finite number of breaths left, and they can just about compute them if they want to. And he just says, remember you. I'm about to have the big forget everything happen to me. To get a perspective, imagine it's now and two people are being executed by the state for what they've done, and they've got all the needles plugged in, and there's all the pumps, and there's all the stuff going to come down, and there's somebody ready to pull a plunger that will send all the chemicals into their body and kill them, and one of them says, hey, remember me when you come into your kingdom. What, did they give you the happy stuff first? Because you're making no sense, dude. You're making absolutely no sense. And then, as if that was not nonsensical enough, Jesus replies with something that if you don't buy his priorities, they're just deluded. Because Jesus replied, I assure you, today you'll be with me in paradise. Paradise is like a garden. We're going to be in the garden. We're going to be together. We're going to be having a party. And either, three things, Jesus is on the medication at this point and totally out of it. B, he's just lying or doesn't understand himself. Or C, he knows something we don't know. Because really, you could almost read this, and I'm not being too blasphemous. You could almost read this if you take party, garden. The guy says, remember me when you come in your kingdom, and Jesus says, don't worry, we'll be partying together tonight. What? Parties at my house tonight. Okay. The happy juice is flowing healthily into these two people. Or they have a different set of priorities and a different reality than what we're dealing with. The basis for their priorities, the basis for their decisions is different than everybody else's in that whole crowd. And it would be nice to know who was right. Which thief? I mean, because honestly, they both died within hours. Okay? They both died within hours. Within just a few hours, it was sunset. They didn't want the thieves on the cross during Passover. It was too high of a holiday, so they came through with swords, and they used the swords or the spears, and they stabbed them so they go ahead and die, so they get them off the cross. They both were done. They were both off the crosses and dead. And honestly, in a garbage dump in hours. And if you just look at that, you'd say, okay, the dude harassing Jesus, at least he was having fun at the end. There was something that we could use to differentiate. What would be good? What would be good? What would be good? Well, you know the answer, right? It is Easter. Because they all die. Thankfully, Joseph of Arimathea shows up and takes Jesus' body and puts it in a tomb before they can put it in a garbage dump. And the rest of that day, we don't know who won. Sure looks like the guy who was harassing Jesus. Saturday definitely looks like the guy who was harassing Jesus. And then Sunday came and changed absolutely everything. Because they come along and there's an angel at the tomb when they go looking for him, and it says, he isn't here, he's risen from the dead. Oh, well, that changes everything. That changes absolutely everything. Because if I'm trying to decide who's right about an issue, okay, if I'm trying to decide who's speaking the truth and who's wrong, and one of them has risen from the dead, I'm going with that guy. Right? Have you known anybody who rose from the dead? Anybody? I'm not talking somebody who had a heart attack and their heart stopped for 30 seconds. I'm talking about somebody who got buried and 3 days later decided to show back up again. That doesn't happen. Tim Keller, who's a pastor, he puts it this way. He says that if Jesus rose from the dead, then you have to accept all that he said. There's just something about the fact that he rose from the dead. I mean, if you're in a debate and one person rose from the dead and he says this, you go, he's probably right. He got the whole death thing right. None of us get that right. Nobody ever gets that right. He got it right. You got to listen to him. If he didn't rise from the dead, then why worry about any of what he said? I was reading a brief article today by a guy, and he was interviewing some pastor who was talking about how he didn't believe Jesus rose from the dead. And I'm like, okay, I can stop reading you now. Because if you deny that, even if you're right, you have nothing to say to me. So, did he rise from the dead? Yes, no. If he did, you got to listen. If he didn't, don't worry about it. But if he did, the issue on which everything hangs is not whether you like Jesus' teaching, but whether or not he rose from the dead. I run into that too. I'll be talking to somebody, and I'll be talking about Christianity or faith, and they'll say, yeah, but I don't like what Jesus said about this. I'm really uncomfortable with what Jesus said about this specific issue. And I've never said this, but I think I might start. I'll say, well, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Because, indirectly, I kind of work for him. I'm in the chain of command. I'm pretty far down, but I'm in the chain of command back to Jesus. Really am. So, if you want, what I'll do for you is let me write it down, make sure I get it exactly right, what you disagree with Jesus about. And what I'll do is I'll send him a memo. It's jesus@heaven.com, I believe, is the email address. And I'll send him a memo, and I'll make him aware of the fact that you have trouble with something that he taught. Or we could ask the question, which of you rose from the dead? And if you don't like something he said, I'm sorry. I have trouble with some of the stuff he said, but he always pulls that I rose from the dead card on me. And so I have to say, oh, okay. You won that one again. That's a card. If you're playing a game and somebody owns the rose from the dead card, they win. They win the game, period. And you say, Steve, okay, that guy wrote that Jesus rose from the dead. Why do you believe he rose from the dead? Why do I believe it? Because they wrote it down. Steve, that makes no sense at all. You believe it because they wrote it down? Yeah. Oh, not just because they wrote it down, but because somebody killed them for writing it down. Because they got oppressed for writing it down. Because people attacked them for writing it down. Because people they didn't have guns, held what do you call those things? Crossbows. Sorry. Somebody held a crossbow to their head and said, deny that Jesus rose from the dead or we will kill you. And they said, fire. And all of them spent their entire life proclaiming that Jesus rose from the dead, even though it cost every one of them their lives. So yeah, the fact that they wrote it down, if you write something down that's going to get you killed, that's going to mean you're going to spend your life on the run, that's going to mean you're going to spend your life being oppressed, I'm going to tend to believe you about the dude rising from the dead. If you say you saw it, I'm going to go with you. Which means I'm going with the guy who rose from the dead. Which means what's my number one reality when it comes to making decisions? Well, there is a God. I'm not him. And he has a right to say certain things. Now, here's where a few of you want to get off the bus, though. Because at this point, you're going, oh, great. That makes sense and everything, but now he's going to say I'm supposed to become religious. And I don't want to be religious. A lot of you never met me before. I don't want to be religious either. I wore a jacket today. You know why I wore a jacket today? Because some people don't know us well enough to show, then they show up in a suit, and I want them to feel a little bit more relaxed. If you accidentally wore a suit to our church service, sorry. Don't make that mistake again. We don't wear suits. Okay? I do my best in everything in my life to make people not think I'm religious. And this is, I don't like religious people. If I have a choice of being at my gym with a bunch of people who are not religious or don't care about religion and being in a meeting with a bunch of religious folk, I'll go to my gym all day even if I don't like the workout. Even if I've already worked out once, I will find some reason to get away from a meeting of a bunch of religious people. I just don't like them. Don't like the way they dress, don't like the way they act, don't like the way they want me to dress and act. But I feel okay not liking religious people because My boss doesn't like religious people either. I said I kind of work for Jesus. Jesus disliked religious people intensely. It is cool to read the stories about Jesus, the books about Jesus, because it seems like he never met a religious person he couldn't pick a fight with. I mean, you look at it. He runs into somebody who's not religious, somebody who doesn't have faith. He was as nice to them. They could be the worst person in the world from our perspective, and he just loved them to death. But he ran into a religious person. Man, gloves were off. He'd go into the temple and just throw everybody out. So he didn't like religious people. I don't like religious people. I don't want you to become religious. Matter of fact, being religious at that particular time with Jesus was a really bad idea. I read one guy, he said that the supreme irony, the supreme irony is that the criminal who was rightly being executed for his crimes, he deserved to be on a cross dying, was infinitely better off than Israel's high priest. The most religious person in the nation, the high priest, the guy who wore the religious clothes all the time, who acted religious, who said, bless you, constantly. He's the one who rejected Jesus and ended up away from God, and the thief on the cross next to him, who had done nothing right up to that moment, ended up connected with God. So God's not looking to make you religious. He is, however, wanting you to make a decision. Jesus is talking earlier before his crucifixion, because he raises another guy from the dead before himself. And Jesus is talking to one of his sisters. And he says to the woman, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Make your decision. That's what he's saying to her. Make your decision. And that's what Jesus is always saying. Because Jesus is always the dividing line, right? You got two thieves and a Jesus in the middle. And one thief is denying who he is, and he's denying where he is, and he's being dishonest about himself. He's being dishonest about just about everything that would come to making a good decision. And you got the thief on the other side, and he's honest about who he is. You know, like with us, I'm a screwed up person who does things that are wrong, and I just keep doing it. He's dishonest. He's honest about where he is. I'm on a path that's not leading me anywhere I want to be. Long term, I want to be somewhere other than here. And he's honest. And he acknowledges who God is. And God's always asking us to make that decision. Now, let me help you. Making a decision to follow Christ doesn't mean you're going to suddenly become perfect or even eventually become perfect here. I've been doing this since I was in 5th grade. I've been a person who has pursued Jesus since 5th grade, and I'm still a jerk. But I'm not nearly as big a jerk as I used to be. Okay? I'm still screwed up. I'm still selfish. I still say bad things to my daughters. I still lose my temper. But I don't lose my temper as much as I used to. And God's been working in me for a long, long time, because he had to start from way, way back in the real bad sections to start the process of turning me into somebody who's even worth knowing. And he's almost there. 5-10 more years. I think I'll be somebody you'd like. But I made the decision. This one rose from the dead. I'm going to listen to him. I'm going to make that my number one priority. I'm going to let him work in my life. And if you're here today and you'd like to make that decision, we'd like to help you. We do this every service. I hold up a blue bag and say, if you'd like to talk to somebody about having a relationship with Christ, you grab a blue bag. We've got blue bags on either corner of the platform. We've got some blue bags on the tables in the back. And if you take one of those blue bags, we've got people that are trained. They'll take about 10 minutes. They'll unpack the bag, walk you through the contents, and show you how to have a relationship with Christ. Now, there are probably some people here who don't have a relationship with Christ and who are going, dude, it sounds like you've been talking for 40 minutes and you want me to change my life based on what you just said. Nah, maybe. But I fully acknowledge that that's not enough time for most people to make that kind of decision. Because I think it's a big decision, and I want you to make it well. I want you to make an informed decision. I want you to understand what you're committing to when you say, I want to be a follower of Jesus Christ. So if you're not ready today to talk to somebody about becoming a follower of Christ, we've got a really simple, just even more simple than a blue bag, we've got a simple thing to do for you for the next step, which is come back next week. It's part of our whole philosophy, because some churches, and there's nothing wrong with this, some churches do these big extravaganzas on Easter. You know, they have a 7,000-piece choir, or they do these all spectacular. We don't do anything spectacular on Easter. Matter of fact, we don't do anything on Easter we don't do the other 50-some weeks of the year. I know it's 52, but sometimes it's 53. Because if you come back next week, you know what's going to happen? You check your kids in the exact same place. You come over here. There'll be some people up here. They'll do some singing, some music for a few songs, about the same number every time. Sort of in the middle, somebody will get up and talk to you about what we believe as a church and about giving to the church. Then there'll be another song, which is the song to get me ready. We call it the canon song. And after the canon song, because it's always really upbeat, I get up and I talk way longer than you want me to talk. And I'm liable to embarrass you, and I'm liable to, that's how it works. And then at the end of that talk, I'll walk over to my table and I'll pick up a blue bag. This past Christmas Eve, we have big Christmas Eve services too. And at the end of one of the two services, I forget which one of my neighbors came up to me. And he said, hey, my wife has been trying to get me into this God thing for a long time. And you've convinced me to give it a shot. That's all he said. So he came back. I don't know if he came back the next week or the next week, but he started coming back. That was Christmas. Come back, look over. He'd be sitting where everybody finds their place to sit, and he found his place he wanted to sit. And he and his wife would sit there. And then about 2 weeks ago, he came up to me after the service. He said, I'm ready to get a blue bag. And he accepted Christ. Made a decision. He asked the questions. We encourage you to ask all the questions you want to ask. There's not such, I love hard questions. I just love hard questions. We want you to make, like I said, want you to make a really good, reasoned, informative decision. And as long as it takes, we have people who come for years trying to figure out if they really want to follow Christ. And that's okay. We're built for that. And there's some of you here, I'm betting, who you used to call yourself a Christian. Or you may still call yourself a Christian, but you've quit really in any meaningful sense being one a while back. And some of you kind of left the church in a huff. Somebody got you mad and you walked out and you stormed out. And some of you left the church in a meander. You just kind of drifted off. Or maybe you were in a church and you got hurt. Somebody did something, and that happens in churches. There are churches that hurt people. There are pastors that hurt people. And you may have been hurt. We do our best to be a no-pain zone. I mean, I'll annoy you, and I'll offend you, but I'll do my best never to hurt you. And we have, throughout the history of our church, we've had people who go through the first cycle who are the people who are far from God, who show up and just show up for a while until they figure out that they want to be a Christian, and then they become a Christian and they get baptized, which is the next step, and they become part of the church, and they start working in the church and leading in the church. And by the way, if you're on your way out and you run into Kristen, she's our children's director, and that's how she got here. She and her husband came as people who were far from God, who were not pursuing God in any way, and just somehow thought they needed something different, and they showed up here, and over the course of months, they made a decision for Christ. We're full of people like that, and we're full of people who've been hurt by churches. We're full of people who wandered away from God and found this was a place they could work their way back. You're invited to join us if you'd like. Just keep coming back. Just keep coming back. No telling what God's going to do with you. You may need to get baptized to announce you're a follower of Christ. You do that. Like we'll see in a few minutes. We do that at least once a month to announce that people are ready to come back to God. Another thing we do every week is, at this point, I'll actually point out that God may have spoken to you specifically about something, or there may be something that's bothering you that you'd like to pray about. We've got a crossover in the corner, and if you don't know what that's for, that's just a place to pray during this next song. We're going to do one more song before we go home. We've got a couple other things. And during this song, if you want to pray about anything at all, you can just walk over to that cross and pray during this next song. If you want to pray with somebody, you'll see some people lined up around the outside of the auditorium, and they love to pray with you about anything. If there's somebody in your family that's hurting and you want to have somebody pray about that, if there's something in your life you want to pray about for you, just approach one of those people. We've also got communion stations. We've got a communion station 2 in the back for Easter and 1 up front here. So you can take communion and remind yourself all that God did for you, if that's something that you want to do for that. But I'm going to finish now. I'm going to leave you with just a thought. John Maxwell said, life is a matter of choices. And every choice you make makes you. So make sure you're getting the biggest choices right.